Hi, today we'll continue our conversation about the inflation and I will talk about successful cases of the countries getting out of hyperinflation spiral. But first I need to make a correction to my previous analysis. A good friend of mine, Kondratiev, reminded me that US dollar is a world reserve currency. And because of that, it's inappropriate to compare inflation in the United States to inflation in other countries like Zimbabwe or Venezuela. And I need to correct that. By the way, Kondratiev was the guy who introduced me to the concept of Kondratiev cycles or Kondratiev waves. Nikolai Kondratiev was the Russian economist who developed this theory. He was executed by the Soviet government in 1938. And this is a big topic, and I will probably make a separate video about it, or I will interview Kondratiev so he can describe it himself. Let's get back to world reserve currency. Reserve currency is the currency that is held in significant quantities by central banks. That means there is a big worldwide demand for US dollars. But not only that, also most commodities are traded in US dollars. For example, if China buys oil from Saudi Arabia, the transaction cannot be done in Chinese renminbis or Saudi Arabia reals. China has to buy US dollars first. And that means it's even bigger demand for US dollars in the world. That means that money supply partially exported to other countries. That means that inflation is partially exported to other countries. That is why we cannot compare the inflation in the United States to the inflation in Zimbabwe or Venezuela. The dynamics will be different. Most likely, the inflation in the United States will take longer, but the destination, in my opinion, will be the same. Because you cannot print limitless amount of money just because you have a world reserve currency status. If that would be the case, then why to bother collecting taxes? Instead of collecting taxes, you can just print limitless amount of money and create wealth just because of the world reserve currency status. Now let's talk about examples of how countries get out of the hyperinflation. The first example on my list is Germany after World War II. After World War II, the country is in ruins. There are price controls, production controls, rationing of all different kind of products. And Allied forces, United States, Britain, and Soviet Union created administration that governs the country. In April of 1948, Ludwig Erhard, German economist, was elected as director of economics, and on June 20th of 1948, he did the currency reform. He introduced the new currency, Deutsche Mark, instead of Reichsmark. But not only that, it was a complex of economic reforms, including abolition of price controls and production controls, and return to the free market. It's interesting that American, British, and French occupation authorities were against this kind of reforms. They thought that this kind of reforms are too drastic. but Ludwig Erhard was convinced that this is the right thing to do, and he went through with these reforms, but he introduced them on Sunday when American, French, and British offices were closed. And when they opened on Monday, French, British, and Americans, they couldn't do anything. It was too late. And this kind of reforms and then Marshall Plan created a path for Germany to become the strongest economy in Europe. This currency reform also stopped hyperinflation in Germany. But we also have to remember that 90% of government and private debt was wiped out, as well as 90% of savings, because the new currency, Deutsche Mark, was equal to 10 Reichsmarks. So usually the currency reset after hyperinflation results in so-called debt forgiveness and wipe out of the savings. Another example of country successfully fighting hyperinflation is Chile in 1970s. Until 1973, the country was led by the government of Salvador Allende, a big friend of Soviet Union, communist. He introduced a lot of socialistic reforms, including nationalization of private businesses, and that led country to the point of starvation. And in 1973, Augusto Pinochet took the power through the military coup. It was bloody conflict. More than 3,000 people were killed. And later Pinochet was convicted for his crimes. In 1975, the government of Pinochet, though, had to implement economic reforms because the country suffered from hyperinflation and economic chaos. And the government of Pinochet chose the group called Chicago Boys to conduct these reforms. Chicago Boys was the group of economists who studied in Chicago University. And Chicago University economic program was led by Milton Friedman at that time. Milton Friedman is the Nobel Prize winner, the founder of the Chicago School of Economics. And he's quite well-known proponent of the free markets. The economic reforms implemented by the Chicago Boys had three main objectives: liberalization of the economy, privatization of the state-owned companies, and stabilization of inflation. As a result, the economy of Chile started to recover pretty quickly, and Chile became one of the wealthiest countries in South America. The miracle of Chile was the term widely used in 1980s describing the economic reforms of the country. You can find a big article in Wikipedia dedicated to miracle of Chile. Unfortunately for Chile, during last year's election, Gabriel Boric was elected as a president of Chile, and Gabriel Boric is the socialist. And now the economic future of Chile is questionable. Another example of successful economic reforms I'd like to discuss is the reforms done by the government of Mikhail Saakashvili in Georgia. Georgia is a former Soviet Union republic, and Mikhail Saakashvili became a president of Georgia in 2004 after so-called Rose Revolution. After becoming a president, Mikhail Saakashvili appointed Kaha Bendukidze as the Minister of the Economy, and Kaha Bendukidze was responsible for the economic reforms in the country. These reforms are not exactly tied to hyperinflation situation, but the transformation of the country was so dramatic that it's worth mentioning. During the first 4 years of reforms, economy of Georgia on average grew 10% every year, and the foreign investment grew about 40% every year. And Georgia reduced the taxes fourfold. All this was done because of the liberalization of the economy, improving the efficiency of the government, and reducing government spending. Estonia, another former Soviet Union republic, implemented similar economic reforms under Mart Laar, former Prime Minister of Estonia. These reforms were highly influenced by free market ideas of Milton Friedman. As we can see, there are a lot of examples of successful economic reforms. There are a lot of examples of countries successfully coming out of the hyperinflation. A lot of times, politicians will do the right thing when there is no other option. And this gives me a lot of optimism. Next time, I will discuss how to survive hyperinflation, and I will give a practical advices based on my own experience. I couldn't include it in this video, otherwise it would make it too long. That's all for today. I will see you next time.